Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. We are from Group 8, and today we are going to learn about language change. Before we start our explanation, let me introduce our member. I'm Redha Shafira, and my partner is Wynneke Putri Shabirah and Fajar Ibrahim. So there are several points that we want to talk today. That is, the first is variation and change, and then types of language change, and then how do change spread, how do we study language change, and reasons for language change. So the first material will be explained by Wynneke.
So I will explain about variation and change. Before I talk about variation and change, I will talk about language change first. Language change is variation over time in a language features. Language change is the phenomenon by which permanent alterations are made in the features and the use of a language over time. Language varies in three major ways, which are interestingly interrelated over time in physical space and socially. Language change. Language change variation over time has its origins in spatial or regional and social variation. The source of change over time is always current variation, so the regional of social variation described in the previous three chapters provide the basis for language change over time. Next, the possibility of a linguistic change exists as soon as a new form develops and begins to be used alongside an existing form. If the new form spreads, the change is in progress. Change from above is the change in language that people are aware of, while change from below is the change that people are not aware of. Example, change in the vowel pronunciation like bear and beer. Next, post-vocalic R, its spread and its status. In many parts of England and Wales, Standard English has lost the pronunciation of R following vowel in words like star and start. Post-vocalic R does not occur in RP nor in the London Cockney dialect. The loss of post-vocalic R seems to have begun in the 17th century in the south and east of England, and it is still in progress since there are areas such as the southwest of England where R is still regularly pronounced. Accents with post-vocalic R are called rhotic. In large areas of England, rhotic English accents are regarded as rural and uneducated. In large part of the USA, on the other hand, post-vocalic R is alive and well and extensively used. So the pronunciation of R in English-speaking communities provides a wealth of example of the complexity of linguistic variation and language change, as well as the arbitrariness of the forms which happen to be standard in any community. Here's the example of post-vocalic R. Next, I will talk about types of language change. There are several types of language change. The first is phonological change. Second is lexical change. Third, syntactic change. And the last is semantic change. The first one I will talk about is phonological change. Phonological change. This involves a change in the pronunciation of sound that does have an effect on the phonological system of a language. Next is lexical change. This type of language change are a bit borrowing a new words. Throughout in history English, it's not only borrowing a word from other language, but also recycle and recombine them to create a new meaning. Next is syntactic change. Syntactic change is primarily associated with the change of word order. In this context, it seems reasonable to assume that general processes are work when the language changes its basic structure. And the last is semantic change. Semantic change is a form of language change regarding the evaluation of word usage usually to the point that the modern meaning is radically different from the original usage. In diachronic linguistics, semantic change is a change in one of the meanings of a word. Maybe that's all from me. The next material will explained by Fajar Ibrahim.
Okay, we come to how do change spread. Next. So the first is from word to group. Many linguists have used the metaphor of wave to explain how linguistic change spread through a community. Any particular change typically spread simultaneously in different directions, though not necessarily at the same rate in all directions. Social factors such as age, status, gender, and region affect the rates of change and the direction in which the wave rolls most swiftly. And the wave metaphor is one useful way to visualizing the spread of a chain from the group to others. A chain may spread along particular age, group, religion, and social group. And we come to from style to style. One theory of how a chain spread presents the process as a very systematic one in the speech of a particular individual. It suggests the chain spread from one style to another, while at the same time it spread from one individual to another within a social group, and subsequently from one social group to another. For example, change spread more formal speech to more casual speech. And the last is from word to word or lexical diffusion. It seems to be the case that sound change not only spread from one person to another and from one style to another style, they also spread from one word to another. Sound change typically spread through different words one by one. It's called lexical diffusion. When a sound change begins, all the words with a particular vowel don't change at once in the speech of a community. People don't go to bed all night using the sound "oo" and wake up using in house, pouch, ho, and out. Instead, the sound change occurs first in word, and then later in another's, and so on. Next. And we come to how do we study language change. The first is apparent time studies. Comparing the speech of people from different age group can be useful clue then to language change. This has been called the apparent time method of studying change. Difference between the speech of older people and younger people are interpreted as indication of change in progress. Younger speakers tend to use more of the newer or innovative form, and the older speaker use more of the older conservative form, the one they adopted in their own teenager years. When the change involved the spread of a prestige from or an admitted use, then it's easy to see the evidence of this spread and increase in the use of this from in the speech of younger people. Is a clue that a new form is being introduced. And the second is real-time studies. The apparent time method of studying language change is a useful shortcut from sociolinguistics who generally cannot afford to wait around for 20 years to see what happens in real time. Sometimes, however, it is possible to build on the work of earlier linguistics when studies change. One very interesting real-time study was reported by Peter Rutgel, who returned to Norwich 15 years after his originally study of the speech person of Norwich people. He discovered that some of the variation he had not had led to linguistic change as predicted. The vowel of beer and beer, for instance, which were still distinct for many speakers in 1968, had completely merged by 1983 for all speakers except those from the highest social group. There were other changes, however, that were well underway by 1983, but which had not been noticed in the 1968 speed sample. These changes were identified by comparing a sample of people in 1968 and another similar sample 15 years later. In other words, this was a study done in real time, a very reliable method of identifying change. Okay, I think that's all from me.
Well, the last is reasons for language change. So there are three reasons for language change. The first is social status, and then gender, and also interaction. The first one is social status. The members of the group with most social status tend to introduce changes into a speech community from neighboring communities which have greater status and prestige. So the lower class speakers are more influential in spreading less conscious linguistic change. Lower class men in particular often adopt speech forms from nearby local workers to express solidarity rather than status or prestige. And then the second one is gender. Difference in the speeches of men and women can cause linguistic change. It can be either of the two who introduce the change. So the woman lead change toward both prestige and vernacular forms, and then the men lead change toward vernacular forms only. Next. Well, the last reason is interaction. Interaction among people is crucial in channeling linguistic change. Uh, Linguistic change progress most slowly in tightly knit communities which have little contact with the outside world. For example, in Gaelic in Scotland and Maori in the far north of New Zealand. Okay, that's the end of our explanation. Uh, thank you for your attention. Sorry for our mistakes. And Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.